This is my first philosophy video I'm making. It's on a topic I've been thinking about a lot recently, kind of because it's the foundation of pretty much everything, like reality, the world, pretty much anything you can think of. First of all, we operate under a set amount of assumptions. So this is just very basic stuff, right? Like 1 + 1 = 2, gravity will continue existing, really basic stuff like that. We trust math and science to distinguish truth from false. What this video is talking about is not what is true, but can truth even be proven? And I've come to the conclusion, basically the answer is almost certainly no. This video will attempt to deconstruct the scientific method, math, logic, metalogic, and the basis of pretty much every single moral and philosophical framework. So the most basic law of thought is logic. Logic isn't just kind of this broad, good idea that most people might think it is. It's actually constructed of 3 different laws. The first one is the law of identity. This basically just states that A is A and A is not B, aka you are you and you're not the person next to you, right? The second is the law of non-contradiction. This basically just means that something can't be A and not A at the same time. The final law of logic is the law of excluded middle. This is basically the proposition that a statement is either true or false and there's not a middle ground. So for instance, my name is Lucas, or my name is not Lucas, but it can't be kinda Lucas. This might seem super basic, but trust me, we do have to start here. And it will get a lot more confusing as we go on. And we start with the basis of these laws to kind of judge everything reality. There's an idea of circularity. What this means is you cannot use the conclusion of the argument to justify the premises. If I said, Reese's is the best candy, and you said, why? And I said, because it's the best candy, that's not an actual argument because you assume the conclusion to justify the premises. So what if we apply this to logic? If you try to prove the law of non-contradiction, the one that says A can't be A and not A, by saying the alternative would be illogical, you are using the standard you are trying to prove in order to prove itself.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
In other words, if it were possible for A to be A and not A, you might say that might be illogical, but that's assuming that logic is true to come to that conclusion. Now this doesn't really make sense because you can't justify logic without using logic, right? We use logic as the basis of every argument, every idea, every debate, everything. If we're trying to justify anything else, like my Reese's example, this wouldn't make any sense. We wouldn't just accept this, right? Now we gotta go a step deeper. So to justify logic, we gotta move to metalogic. Metalogic is actually just the logic of logic. That's what meta means. So some people might argue we can kind of move outside of the laws of logic and use metalogic. Now metalogic isn't quite as simple. It has a lot of different laws and I can't explain them all in one video. But one of the laws, for instance, is A equals A. This is such a basic idea, sometimes it's pretty hard to understand. Literally all this is saying is that something is something. It's not even saying that it's not nothing, it's just saying that it is something. So what this would mean in reality is I'm wearing a shirt and I am wearing a shirt. So again, it just seems kind of silly and stupid, but it is necessary for logic to exist. But the issue is, even in that first statement of metalogic, where A equals A, it is still just a preposition. There's no actual reasoning for it. How do we know that A actually does equal A? Most people would think this is a silly idea because it seems so obvious. But actually think about it for a second. If somebody says, I'm wearing a t-shirt and I'm also wearing a t-shirt, how could you actually prove that? Now somebody might say, well, I can see you're wearing a shirt, so therefore you are wearing a shirt. But there's an issue with this too. Interpreting that evidence of me wearing a shirt also requires using logic. This would be similar to trying to decide if the rules of chess were fair, and the way that you determine this is by looking in the rulebook and it says right there that it's fair. Now, I know most of you guys probably haven't heard that much about the actual laws of logic or metalogic at all. Let's move to something that might be a little easier to understand. Sorry if I mispronounce this, but Ferdinand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead created a book called Principia Mathematica, which attempted to prove that math derives purely from logic with no assumptions. They spent over 300 pages just to prove, without any presuppositions, that 1 + 1 = 2. They thought they'd succeeded until Kurt Gödel, again sorry if I mispronounced that, completed the incompleteness theorems, which later shattered this idea of a self-contained mathematical system. Math rests on these things called axioms. Axioms are things that are self-evidently true. This basically means that we just assume them to be true and we don't really talk about whether or not they're true. This is extremely useful, for instance, in a debate. Imagine every time you had to have a debate, you'd have to clarify whether or not we agree on the scientific method and logic and math and all these other claims before you even get to what's really important. So for instance in math, you can choose to either use Euclidean or non-Euclidean geometry, but whichever system you choose relies completely on the unprovable assumption of parallel lines. So this tells us that math does not actually tell us what is true, but rather what would be true if our assumptions were provably correct. Now according to Hume's problem of causation, we see event A, and then we see event B, and we infer that there's causation, but we never see the causation itself. This is the problem of induction. If the farmer feeds the turkey for 1,000 days, this turkey might assume that the farmer is benevolent. But on the 1,001st day, the turkey gets executed. The reason the turkey thought the farmer was benevolent is because it was operating under the assumption that because something happened multiple times, it is more likely to happen again. If we don't question these assumptions, it can lead us to making irrational decisions. But it still begs the question, can we actually prove any of these assumptions? Or are they all just arbitrary? In all these examples, we operate off of a set of assumptions. The turkey operates off the idea of induction, the mathematician operates off the laws of logic operate off the laws of metalogic, and metalogic operates the laws of what? This is the most important part of the video. This is the statement that, in my opinion, underpins everything. Reality, the universe, everything. You want to know what it is? No statement is provable. That's it. In my opinion, that is the most important thing in all of reality. Now some of you, especially if you're familiar with debate or philosophy, might see a flaw in this statement. It's similar to the liar's paradox, where if we imagine Pinocchio, whose nose grows longer when he lies, makes the statement, my nose will grow. This is a lie, his nose will grow. His nose grew, that was a true statement, so it shouldn't have grown. It's also called an infinite regress. Or in more basic terms, A is true because B is true, and B is true because C is true, etc., etc., etc. And the perceived issue with the statement, nothing is provable, is that I'd have to suppose proof to even make that claim. Someone might criticize the statement by saying, well, whenever you say nothing is true, you're supposing truth whenever you make a truth claim. That proves the statement. So let me try to act this out. Person 1 says, no statement is provably true. Person 2 says, that's a truth claim, and by making that statement, you're supposing truth, which is unprovable. The first person could respond by saying, and that's exactly right, that proves my statement by your criticism. If you say nothing is provably true, and then the person says, well, that statement isn't provably true, that statement is a thing, and so therefore, it would make sense that it is not provably true. So the statement, in and of itself, proves itself. Where do we go from here? If we accept this idea, which is called epistemic circularity, how do we function? How do we live? It doesn't really make sense to not assume anything, because if we don't, we can't really do anything. Now the solution is arbitrary beliefs. Arbitrary, if you don't know, just means random or without reason. I believe in logic and I live my life as if logic exists, even though I know it can't be proven. So that's why I choose to believe in logic, I choose to believe in math, and I choose to believe in all of these things. And the way that we can communicate and debate with others is by having shared beliefs. So whenever I meet somebody new, I assume that they believe in logic and math and all these other things that we just accept to be true. And it's from this set of arbitrary beliefs that we can have discussions about everything. Political issues, philosophy, religion, everything. So to answer the title of this video, is truth true? The answer is no. We do not know if it's true, and we are certain we will never know. But I personally choose to believe in truth, and I hope you will too. Thank you for watching this video.